Good morning, everyone. It's Marcus here. I am the ISV BDM here at Ingram Micro. This morning, we'll have Dean and Vish from the VIN team presenting on cybersecurity defense strategy. I'll pass now to Dean. Dean, over to you.
Hi, and welcome to our cyber defense strategy presentation. All about that. Vish is going to be taking us through the presentation, so it's with pleasure that I introduce Vish to take over.
Thanks, Dean. Hey guys, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you guys are based. Today I'm here in sunny Melbourne, I'd like to say, and it's a good day to probably talk about cybersecurity and defense strategy with everything going on. My full name is Vishwajit Venkatesh, been with Veeam about close to 5 years now with very different roles. But today we're talking about Veeam cloud service providers. And that is where I belong exactly in the Veeam business. I work with the partners in the ANZ geography, helping them develop Veeam powered services. Just before we proceed, probably take a quick sound check and make sure everybody can hear me. If you can hear me, use the raise your hand option on the right hand side panel of your window, or you could even put this in the chat box. I'll just wait for somebody to confirm you guys are able to hear me. Oops, sorry about that. All right, looks like I did get a couple of confirmations, so thank you. You might have already noticed certain housekeeping rules already, that you were muted on the entry when you've entered the session. If you do have any questions, please use the question box or the chat functions, and we will post the recording and provide you with the slides of this specific session. All right, so what's the agenda looking like today? First, Dean will take us through the cybersecurity defense strategy and what it means for you to know where your data is located, how should you be protecting, and then I will come in for the technical side of the conversation, covering the hardening process, how Veeam manages this from a scale-out backup repository perspective, where should you keep your data, and as cloud service providers, we know that Veeam Cloud Connect is your go-to product. So I'll also give you guys some tips around when to consider Cloud Connect and when to consider object storage, direct to object storage. So I'll just go ahead and hand it over to Dean now to start us off. Thanks, Dean.
And thank you, Vish. Appreciate it. And then let's start with the why. Why should I care? Why should I care? Why is cybersecurity so important? What we see is two types of businesses. Business that have been hacked already, and those businesses, they've undergone a huge amount of change and a huge amount of pain, if you like, when they've been hacked. And I tell you, if you're an organization that's already been hacked, and then cybersecurity defense strategy is an absolute no-brainer. But on the other side of there, it's really about those next in line, because it seems like, especially in these days, this day and age, that you're either hacked or you're next in line. So what we do is make sure that you can buy some time. In the middle, there are elements of the business that you can look at to buy time in between. So what we mean by that is that cybersecurity criminals, they look at the weakest and most valuable elements of your business. So in buying time, you're able then to put in the right type of defense strategy. So if you haven't already got a defense strategy in place, we help you buy time to get there. And when we talk about attacks, they can be from malicious insiders or third parties. So it's really important that when you're in this buying time phase, that you really start to understand what a modern protection strategy looks like, and to be able to avoid and to stop attacks and not be next in line. So let's look more specifically in terms of the cyber defense strategy per se. So it's really about the company itself, about people, processes, and technology. So defining a cybersecurity defense strategy is about assisting all those challenging tasks and ensuring that you're 100% sure. And data is the lifeblood of a company, surrounded by the people, the processes, and the technology. And with today, with more and more people working from home, these become much, much more important. So the organizations are defined by people, process, and procedures, and the technology. Around that, there's other layers: follow, leverage, and enable. What that represents really is that people follow processes and procedures, and they leverage technology to assist them. And the technology enables processes to work faster and smarter and better automation. So when we talk about people, we talk about defining the roles. We talk about screening people when they're onboarding. We talk about the education systems, awareness and behavior, and how we look after digital hygiene, especially where data sovereignty is key. Many breaches happen because of old software and old processes. So make sure you screen the people in the first place and update applications. And more we're seeing, migration moves to modernization. So the modernization, and particularly from an ISV perspective, is closing down those holes of older applications and ensuring they're modernized. Moving to processes. This is where we're seeing customers, end user customers, adopting business continuity plans. This is when DRAS and BAS, or DR as a service, disaster recovery as a service, and backup as a service, provide that level of continuity. And as much as that's a document, there are specific elements of design principles that we make sure are in place. And Vish will talk a little bit about 3210, the backup rule. And I'll just touch briefly on the principles of least privilege and secure by design. So really, if we look at cybersecurity holistically, I'll talk a little bit further about principles of least privilege soon, but secure by design is really around, that zero trust and keeping it simple. So that that KISS strategy there, or keeping it stupidly simple, ensuring the data, the infrastructure is up to place. We also look at patch management as a whole, and that really ties back to digital hygiene. If I go to the next, yes. So in terms of technology, it's a tool to help. So authentication and authorization is tied back to hardening, as well as required tools, both software and hardware. So make sure that hardening is part of the design, and make sure you use the tools in the right order. So all of these you can see there with the beautiful heart in the middle, that they all lead to making sure that the heart of the business is protected. That's the data. Let's just move to the next slide. Yeah. So everything is surrounding your data, right? That's the heart of the business. And the heart of the business is, there's a number of pillars around that defense strategy that are important. And I think the first pillar, if you look at it from a functional perspective, it's identifying. So the organizations must develop an understanding of their environment to manage cybersecurity risk. It's the systems, the assets, data capabilities. And to comply with this function, it's really essential to have a full visibility in your digital and physical assets and their interconnections. So defined roles and responsibilities, understanding your current risks and exposures, and putting policies and procedures into place to manage risks. Protect, you can see just come up there. Organizations must develop and implement appropriate safeguards to limit or contain the impact of any potential cybersecurity event. So to comply with that, your organization must control access to digital and physical assets, and provide awareness and education and training around that. So that's all around protecting. And detecting is where you're implementing the appropriate measures to quickly identify any cybersecurity event that happens. The adoption of continuous monitoring solutions that detect anomalies, anomalous activities, and other threats to operational continuity is really within this function. So your organization must have visibility of the network and to anticipate any cyber incidences and have all the information at hand to do so. So continuous monitoring is of the threats and hunting in very effective ways is important to analyze and prevent cyber incidents. When we talk respond, should a cyber incident occur, organizations must have the ability to contain that impact. To comply, your organization must craft a response plan, define communication lines amongst the appropriate parties, collect, analyze information about the event, perform all required activities to eradicate the incident, and incorporate any type of lessons learned within this. And then recovery. So we talk a lot about the defense strategy, but it's really the ability to be able to recover when something does go wrong. So organizations must develop and implement effective strategies and activities to restore capabilities or services that were impaired due to a cybersecurity event. So your organization must have a recovery plan in place to be able to coordinate, restore activities, and incorporate those lessons, defining a prioritized list of action points which can be used to undertake recovery activities. It's absolutely critical for a timely response. So we adhere and work on frameworks such as the NIST cybersecurity framework. That's for organizations of all sizes and sectors and maturities. So while the framework was designed with critical infrastructure in mind, it's an extremely versatile framework. So implementing NIST can help your organization become more focused on protecting its assets. And as you can see, just starting to populate around that, this is where we overlay VEEM solutions. So all the VEEM solutions are aligned to those functional pillars, if you like, in terms of your overall strategy. So here you can see and identify, you want to see what's happening in terms of compliance, as well as proactively detect things that may occur or may account. On the protect side, we've got a great story around immutable storage, data protection, encryption, and snapshots. Around the detect area, we ourselves are not a security vendor. We can help you detect and recover, but we can't prevent things from happening. So our focus is really to arm you with the tools to get you to the next pillars, to response and recover, data labs and API patching, patch management, detecting possible breaches. And on the response side there, we have additional tools that can help with the recovery process, data labs, CDP. If you can breach, you can fail over to another platform running in a completely different zone. So all of those, as I mentioned, coming together to that recovery. So using all of these elements, we can get you to recovery to meet your SLAs. In fact, we have many ways of restore capabilities from the same data set to back up the file and help you recover. In fact, 91 storage capabilities. And I'm not going to go through them all, but that just gives you a view of, depending on your strategy and depending on because each organization has a slightly different strategy. We have a scenario, we have restore capabilities from that same data set to help you. So I'll just shift gears a little bit now and talk a little about hardening. So hardening is as a countermeasure. This is pretty important. So when we think hardening, we just want to quickly look at how that's used as a countermeasure. How we harden Veeam because we run on top of an infrastructure, because we're software defined. So it really depends on how you deploy Veeam. So just stepping back in terms of the physical security layer. Yeah, physical security. That is the person actually providing access to the services. So that's access, that's authorization, and that's just making sure you have security in place and visibility, and that's physical security. So you know where people feel watched, they behave well, if you like. So physical security is important. On hardware security, which we've just moved to there, that's making sure that physical services, storage, edge compute, are all secured accordingly. Encryption on devices, TPM devices. If you have multiple things and multiple people running through a data center, make sure it's all locked down. In terms of secure infrastructure, that's security at the virtualization layer. So looking at encryption of moving data around, if you want Veeam to be secure, you need to ensure that that infrastructure is secure. So it's an important part of your strategy. In terms of segmentation, that's when we look down at the network layer, that's looking into the network world, segmentation of critical data. So while segmentation introduces an element of security domain, if you have this in place and zoned, for example, you can shut the zone down, and some organizations even use an escape pod, which eject the whole system and run. So segmentation leads, if you like, to security domains. And when we look at security domains, we need to consider the infrastructure and the components of the infrastructure that are offered out. So segmentation and security is an important part of our solutions. Do a place Veeam component in a work group or in the production domain? No, definitely don't put it in the production domain. Always separate it from the environment you're protecting. So ensuring as well there's in a management domain that's controlling the production domain. Now, this is important, when you look at your domains, and we use firewalls to provide that security domain, and using that to segment all of those different elements within the network layer. So making sure traffic can access the relevant parts, and we don't have excess traffic or access going around the infrastructure and impacting your end user client. So in that sense, you can also think of that in terms of micro segmentation. We want to also make sure that the virtual machines in base are safe. So if you're running a template, hardening the template and ensuring the template is being used to install Veeam components on top of it. So removing attack services, hardening them from the start, aligning them to international standards, which I mentioned before, the NIST Cyber Security Defense Framework, or CIS, which is the Center for Internet Security. So then look at that as to how we use that segmentation of duties to actually allocate the path of least privilege, and ensuring that the roles and responsibilities are granted only to people that need to perform that work. Then we need to look up at the data we're using or receiving. We're either using or receiving from customers, and ensure encryption is part of that. And then when we talk to end user customers, we encourage anyone that's using offsite storage, for example, that the data is encrypted before leaving the data center, right at that point. And then last but no means least, we look at the repository hardening. That's the data hardening itself when we talk that through. And that's kind of the countermeasure. And what I'll do is I'll just hand back to Vish, who will take you through our scale out backup repository, and he'll talk about hardening and the element 321. So Vish, I'll hand back to you to take over from here.
Thanks, Dean. Appreciate it. Just making sure everybody can hear me. All right. So data management protection strategy. So we have a running joke inside Veeam. Every time we said, if I had a penny for every time I said 3210, I'd probably be a millionaire by now. But essentially, it is having 3 different copies of your data that does involve your production, another copy where you can recover from very quickly, hopefully somewhere very close to your production data center, and having that third copy elsewhere, right? And it's also different make sure that it's in 2 different medias. This could be on your disk storage, this could be on your deduplication appliance, which is in a secondary site in Colo, or this could even be on a tape media if that's what you prefer. And obviously making sure one of those copies is always offsite, making sure it is geographically isolated from your production environment. And today's topic, what we're going to be concentrating on today is going to be having that one copy air gapped. As I mentioned before, this could be an immutable copy which is on-prem, which is in your same data center as your production machine, or this can be an air gapped on a tape. And also making sure that there are no errors, right? So what good is all that data? You may be protecting your VMware environment, you may be protecting your Hyper-V, even your public cloud environment for that matter. And if you're bringing back everything and you don't know, if you're not checking for errors regularly, and if you don't know if it's actually recoverable, what is the point of actually keeping all the data safe, right? So you've got a lot of those features available in the Veeam portfolio. Dean did mention a couple of those before as well. He was talking to you about how we can leverage data labs, or there's other elements like Sure Backup and Sure Replica elements, which you can leverage as well to do the same functionalities. Now, let's talk about scale out backup repository in particular to begin with, right? Especially this becomes really important when you're handling how Veeam manages your storage lifecycle in terms of where does it sit, where does it move through, and how does your data actually move between those platforms inside of your storage. So the first one being a performance tier. As the name suggests, this can be anything. So you could be backing up any workload into your performance tier. This, as you can see on the screen, that's direct attached storage, network attached storage, deduplication appliance, and a hardened repository. What is a hardened repository? Is essentially a Linux repository. I'll come back to that one. What you need for performance tier is a fast performing disk, right? So as long as you can recover soon from this, that's the ideology behind it. Again, from a policy based and easier way from which is configured within Veeam, you will be then able to move this data between different tiers of storage. The next one is going to be a capacity tier. So capacity tier can come in different forms. If you prefer, object storage, which is in your hyperscalers, for example, AWS or Microsoft Azure, if you prefer the blob storage or anything for that matter. Most of my service providers whom I talk to on a day-to-day basis tend to go towards your S3 compatible on-prem storage, because that is what actually works for them, right? This is my experience personally. And this also makes sure that a service provider's SLA agreement is very much in his control, right? He doesn't have to worry if maybe AWS region in Sydney goes down, because he's in control of the data and he's got it on object storage, which is inside his data center. Recently, we did add Google Cloud Platform to this as well. So you will still be able to move, if that is your preference, or if that is one of your customers' preference, you can actually move your data into the object storage layer there as well. Again, going to that cheapest form of object storage, right? So probably, approximately right now, probably the cost of S3 buckets is about, your normal ones is about 10 cents a gig. So probably 5 times cheaper, which is an archive tier, right? S3 Glacier would be 2 cents a gig. So going that extra mile to keep that archival data for longer periods of time, you can absolutely do this. And you can move the data. And again, Veeam will manage how this data is actually moved between all of those platforms, right? And last but not the least, which we will be concentrating on today, is you can make your data immutable. from that very first step on day one, when you make that primary copy into your local performance tier, to your S3 compatible object storage, and to your archive tier as well. If you're putting it on an S3 bucket on AWS, you can still move it to a Glacier, or if you're moving it via Azure Blob, you can move it to an archive storage as well. Please make note that at this stage, we're still awaiting on the immutability on Microsoft, but right now you do have immutability on S3 compatible object storage and your Amazon S3 buckets as well. All right, let's talk more about the performance tier and how you can actually make this immutable. All right, so last year with version 10, we introduced Hardened Linux repositories. Linux repositories were always there. We found a way to make that immutability, available. Essentially, to be honest, this was very much driven by a service provider landscape, right? Because when we brought in the object storage immutability, that was one of the biggest features. Service providers always wanted to do that, but in their own data center. So the only way to do it was having on-prem object storage. So they wanted something which was much more faster and still immutable. That was the whole reason we developed this actually. So why do you need this? Making sure that your primary copy, which is on your data center, could be malware safe. Nobody can delete it, just in case you have an insider, protection issue where you have a malicious insider, somebody at a rogue admin, if he's looking to delete some of the data, or if somebody else got hold of your credentials and you got hacked, as Dean was suggesting, you could still need protection from internally within your security domain. So that's what you need it for. Again, a pro tip here, always make sure you're using XFS technology. So if you've been with Veeam for a while now, you must have already realized the block cloning advantages you've had with REFS. So very much similar, making sure that you get that extra block cloning capabilities and storage saving with XFS technology as well. Again, keeping it in line with the other modules of Veeam, we've made it as simple as we can from a UI perspective, make that backup immutable for X number of days. So that is as easy as is. That was the exact same UI that you had before when you were adding a Linux repository. There's just an extra step there. And again, how do we do this is what makes it stand out from the other providers. You can get a single use access credentials. So you know that your Linux server cannot be logged in at all times or anytime in that specific manner. And even Veeam does not have to access it all the time, right? In terms of updating or having access to that transport service, making changes and things like that. So we allow you to have that single use credentials. So you install a persistent data mover service within your Linux repository for that one time, and then you're out. And you can actually disable all of those communications that happen. I'll take you guys through a little bit of more details when we talk about the architecture. So what does it do? Doesn't allow anybody to actually go ahead and delete or even modify your backups. And guess what? Even if somebody just logs into your Veeam systems and actually changes the retention from maybe a 60 days to a 30 days by mistake, there was a new administrator who walked in, he changed the retention maybe to save some storage. It will actually protect you against those kind of configuration as well, because even retention cannot be applied if you've got an immutability set for 60 days. Veeam will not let you apply retention as well. So it's quite good. We do leverage the immutability flag. You can identify this. If you have the patience to jump into the logs, you will see those immutability flags to verify this as well. Again, where can you use this? If you've been around Veeam for a while, you already know that we do have 3 types of backup modes, and making sure that you guys understand, because of the way the technology is implemented, we will obviously need those regular synthetic full backups to make those backup backup chains sealed. So that's the essential, because if it's a forever forward, you already know that immutability cannot be applied there. So that's one disadvantage there, but probably better off, because you'll always need those regular synthetic fulls anyway. and it's a better practice to have those. And again, backup copy job. So we did change the way we do backup copy jobs, again, moving away from that forever forward, making those regular synthetic full backups, break the chain and having that converted into a forward incremental chain. So if you're not sure about how this works, please log in to that specific blog site when you get the slide deck, and you will be able to see what that changes were with version 11. All right, let's talk about the architecture and best practices, right? So if you're setting up your Veeam backup and replication server, you've already set up your Windows proxy or a Linux proxy, you know those are the security ports. This was intentional, so we're talking about hardening. So make sure that you allow only those ports and only, when you're configuring those firewalls, right? When you're configuring those extra security defense procedures, make sure this is documented as well and what needs to be open. Probably your networking team will appreciate this more as well in terms of how it's documented. And the element that I want to talk about today is that specific repository, right? So the TCP ports between 2500 to 3300, not essentially you need all of it, right? So the way Veeam works is we start that first task assignment from 2500, and then we incrementally start assigning tasks. So 2501, 02, and so on and so forth. If you do have a small footprint within your organization, when the data is moving from your production environment where the proxy reads the data and we move it to the repository, you can actually, have those tasks assigned incrementally and only allow maybe 2500 to 3000, right? And that's good enough probably. And just make sure that that is available to you. And again, 6162, the TCP port, that's where the Veeam transport service is installed, and that's what we use as well. And all you need is that 22 for your SSH, right? So the reason I mentioned this is if you've set up your Linux repository, make sure that your SSH is disabled. Only for that first time you can use it, take a look, and then disable all kind of connectivity at all. So this way, you know that there is a persistent Veeam transport service which is sitting inside the Linux, which authenticates against the backup and replication server that one time initially, and then you can move your data to and fro from that specific repository. Hopefully that's made sense. If you do have questions around this, please feel free to put it in the question box. Yes, probably one of those questions would be, how often do I need to update that transport service because I've used a single authentication method? To be honest, that happens really very rarely when you get product updates from Veeam that requires a transport service update. That's a quite stable component as well for Veeam. All right, what if you need extended immutability? Let's say as an organization, you're talking to your service provider, and then you've set up, in the very beginning, you've set up an SLA agreement where you said, all right, I want all my backups to be immutable for 90 days, but you actually need something, extra. So there was a request from the auditing team to keep that specific backups immutable for a longer period. Don't have to worry. All you need is a PowerShell command. You can leverage this PowerShell command and make changes to that immutability flag. Again, can you do this? Yes. Would I recommend you doing this more often? Absolutely not. Use this when necessary. That's the whole point. We have it on the PowerShell command. And if you're using and delivering managed services, it's probably an ace in the pocket when you actually need it. Something to remember though is all the time here is in the UTC mode. And let's move on. That's how you attain immutability on a performance tier. Let's move on to the capacity tier. So this is the object storage when we actually bring it in, that second layer of storage or second stage of storage lifecycle, if you may want to call it. You can make your data immutable on S3 compatible object storage or on an S3 bucket in AWS. So let's take a look at that one now. Why do you need it? Again, protect your client's data locally, which was stage one, and again in that secondary offsite location as well. It cannot be deleted. It's always encrypted as well. This has been available for a while now, since version 10. So what would you need is set up the object storage repository, whatever that means to you as a service provider, and again setting up that scale out backup repository to enable capacity tier, enable copy mode, and use immutability, right? So using copy mode, just make sure you understand what using copy mode versus move mode is, because that's a very key element, and that might define how you move your data between those platforms. Because copy mode essentially moves it immediately. I'll take you through that, and the move mode can actually age your data into another layer. All right, adding an object storage. So add any object storage. As you can see here, we're adding an S3 bucket in a specific AWS location. It's a single checkbox, easy to set it up. You can have a soft limit, make backups immutable for 7 days, 70 days, or whatever the number of days that you prefer. Again, make sure that you go through, we do have a specific list of storage that is compatible with S3 compatible storage for immutability. So, and it's also already on our Veeam website as well. So make sure you go through those. And as I was talking earlier, if you use the copy mode, you have better SLAs. And by that, what I mean is it's easier for you to actually provide solutions to your customers where you can recover if the entire data center goes down as well, because it's immediately copied into that second layer, which is your object storage. You don't have to configure a separate job for it. So that's the added advantage that I was talking about earlier. How does this actually work? So Veeam performs a backup on a Monday. That's the first full backup. Let's assume that. And as soon as it's written, it actually goes into your capacity tier. Let's imagine this is an S3 bucket that's configured. So pretty much if you do a backup at 10 p.m. one night, it's immediately moved to that S3 bucket after it's written to that performance tier. So you know that without configuring anything else, you already have a second copy which Veeam is created within the scale out backup repository. And then the next day is your incrementals. We use change block tracking. So everything is going to be incremental for Tuesday, Wednesday, so on and so forth. And this is what happens when you actually lose your performance tier, right? So let's say all of that, you introduce the immutability on that S3 bucket, and it was immutable for 7 days, and everything on your performance tier was not immutable. And that's okay too. You're using a regular Windows repository. So that's another way to attain immutability. If you can afford a Linux repository on your performance tier, that works even better. But just in case, you're making sure that if your file is being deleted, it cannot be deleted. So just showing you that if you log into the object storage within the Veeam window and you try to delete a copy, you'll not be able to delete it because it's marked until a specific date or point in time. What happens when the performance tier is actually not available? As I said earlier, I live in Melbourne, so we just experienced something not quite as bad as that. Nothing caught fire, but we did have an earthquake. Let's assume your data center was in the vicinity of that earthquake and your entire data center is down. Now you will be able to recover immediately from that copy, because you know what? You set it up on a copy mode. It's going immediately as soon as that 10 p.m. backup happened. So if this was somewhere in the middle of the night, you know that your RPO is probably the data that you've lost between that earthquake to that 10 p.m. backup that went up into the object storage. And that was immutable, so you can always recover. Again, you must be thinking, how do I recover? If you look at it, you don't really need a full-fledged Veeam backup and replication server with all the licenses installed and all of it. All you need is spin up a quick Veeam backup and replication server, community edition, which is free of cost and available for download, and add that specific object storage. Of course, you will need the authentication to your S3 bucket to make it available to you. Import your backups. So Veeam is intelligent enough to import all the backups, so it's available for restores. You bring it back on disk, and then you'll be able to restore all of your production environment immediately. So, but just an added pro tip there would be, make sure you have a configuration backup file. Doesn't hurt anyone. Always, as a service provider, I would always recommend you guys to do that and have that maybe on your data center from the customer's data center, or you can have this in a separate location if the customer's got 2 locations as well. So you'll be able to restore from that configuration backup and get all that configuration for your Veeam backup and replication server, and then restore from there as well. Again, you can perform instant VM recoveries. You don't have limitations on the number of virtual machines you can recover. So as Dean was suggesting earlier in that 91 ways of restores, probably one of my most favorite is the instant VM recovery, where you can move it to any platform. And this could be any backup, actually. This could be your EC2 or VMware backup, or even a physical machine backup. Now let's take a look at the archive tier, the cheapest form of storage, right? So just a quick heads up, if you're a service provider who's gone via the route of S3 compatible object storage, you might be wondering, what does an archive tier mean for me? To keep that extra cheaper storage, what I would say is you probably look at, instead of having a cheaper form of storage because it's already on-prem for you, you probably look at storage replication. So you give that extra redundancy to your customer. So let's say if you've got, an HPE or a Pure or any of those that are NetApp storage grade kind of object storage, you can have that replicate between two locations and leverage that other copy to actually restore from. So maybe essentially this would be the fourth copy of data as well. May not be cheaper, but you get the idea. At this stage, immutability again is on the S3 Glacier tier only. Make sure you check the same box, make the backups immutable for X number of days. Again, this is once it hits that specific third level of storage. And again, you have the option of having it with a standalone or having that dedupe files. So what do we mean by dedupe files is Veeam always moves the data in an incremental fashion. So if you've used, a GFS backup, it's only going to be a GFS, which moves into your Glacier storage, which is your weeklies, monthlies, and yearlies. I would personally advise you to go for the monthlies and yearlies. The reason is, because your Amazon S3 Glacier has a 90-day period. So if you delete anything before 90 days, even if that means that was for a retention, you'd probably be charged a lot more for egress. So they don't really want you to, make changes to that data once it is there. So make sure that, you probably move your monthlies and yearlies. But if you're moving weeklies, make sure it's probably, something more than at least 26 weeks. And that way you're covered for that 6-month period as well. That's a tip for you when you're configuring it. And again, having that extra option between standalone full and dedupe files, right? What happens here is every time Veeam moves it in an intelligent manner. So we don't actually send the full backup, we only send the incremental back into that object storage layer. So what between capacity and the archive tier. So what you need to make sure is, if you need a full backup, which means that you're not going to deduplicate any data at all from the previous time, you do have that option. Check that first option there on your screen. Store archive backups as standalone fulls. You might not have a lot of storage space saving, but you can understand that it is actually a cheaper form of storage, so you can afford to do that as well. All right, let's quickly recap. That was probably a lot of information only for storage lifecycle management. How would you back up your data into a primary performance tier, fast performance storage, and then you move it into a capacity tier, essentially an object storage engine, and then you move your backups into your S3, Glacier tier or your Microsoft Blob storage. Where can you make your data immutable? You can make your data immutable from the start to the finish on a Linux hardened repository or any S3 compatible storage, and then on an S3 Glacier if you're going that route. Again, if you want to know what can you use as a service provider or as a customer, what are the options that they have affiliation to? Veeam has obviously worked with a lot of alliance partners, and we do have a list of those storage available. Veeam Ready repository would always, you can see that badge on our websites for which specific alliance that we're working for, be it Dell, HP, NetApp. So all of those compatibilities are listed, and look for those, right? So Veeam Ready Object Storage is everything for capacity tier, and Veeam Ready Object Storage with Immutability is specifically those platforms which have immutability assigned as well. All right, so now you're probably thinking, as a Veeam Cloud service provider, should I go the route of that, direct object storage mode? Why do I need to set up a Veeam Cloud Connect backup? And why can't I just have a managed service business where I go take care of the customer's environment and directly move it into an S3 object storage? I don't have to bring it through my data center and move it up there. Fair question to ask. To be honest, it does apply in some situations, and there are certain criteria that I would consider both the different situations in. So where would I do this? So if you're looking at a customer site, you're moving all that data through the internet, right? You're moving that through a WAN, and you're moving that directly to whatever the customer chooses. He could be choosing an S3 compatible, object storage, which is available in a secondary data center of his own. He could be moving that to your S3 compatible object storage or an S3 bucket. Wherever he does move it to, he'll have to go through the internet for this. And that's probably, if you're talking about security, going through a WAN, probably not the best idea. So this is where you will have the advantage of moving your data through a Cloud Connect server, because a customer will always send everything on one single port. That's right, that's 6180, and all of this connection is actually secure because it's a secure VPN which Veeam establishes when you actually add a service provider. So every data communication between a customer environment to your cloud gateway is always going to be secure, and you will be providing that certificate and authentication in the very beginning at during the process of onboarding the customer, so you know that it's all going through a secure link. That's the biggest advantage. And the second advantage that I would suggest is going through a Cloud Connect server would give you few more advantages as a service provider. You will be able to actually add on extra services, which will probably be a little bit more useful to you as a business at a later point in time, just in case, let's say the entire customer data center goes down and you have a Cloud Connect server. You'll be able to spin up all of the customers backup in your data center and provide access to the customer on demand, right? And I'm only talking about backups here. There's a whole new use case for disaster recovery as a service. There's a whole new use case where you step that up into a CDP conversation where you want to have a replica with 15-second RPO and things like that. But right now, for only backups, you can actually spin up his entire environment in your IaaS platform and provide that as DR as a service. All right, the main differences, let's take a look at that. Object storage, extremely easy to set up. As I was taking you through that conversation, it's one single checkbox, move my backups into object storage. It's done. It's easy as well. What is the downside of Veeam Cloud Connect is requires an additional step. You need to add a Veeam Cloud Connect service provider in the customer's environment, which is fine if you ask me, because the trade-off, as I spoke about earlier, is all of your communication is going through a secure link. Copy direct to object storage, no extra job required. It can go immediately. Here, another extra backup copy job is required. So that's another extra step, but it does give you options for arranging different retention policies. So remember that when you choose that check copy option, what's going to happen is the retention that is applied is pretty much the same for a performance tier and your object storage. But if you do set up a backup copy job to a Cloud Connect location, you will actually be able to define longer retention periods. So to give you a better understanding, that would look like, I'll have 15 or 30 days of restore points locally. And then when I move it to my Cloud Connect service provider, I'll probably have a 60-day chain. And then in addition to that, I'll have those GFS backup copies as well, right? Managed at the client VBR location. So it's kind of, isolated manner. You do not have the view of that unless you're managing that, from a VPN or something. But if you go via the Cloud Connect route, you will actually have that entire backup visibility from one specific console. You'll have that ability as well. Immutability can be attained in both the locations. That's not a problem, but how you attain immutability and who manages the immutability is the conversation that you need to have as well. So if it's a complete managed services, I would definitely recommend you going down the route of the Cloud Connect as well. And it's easily, as I said earlier, easily you can expand your use cases into an MSP conversation or a DR as a service conversation, because if this is somebody who takes care of everything on-prem on their own and all they're going to use you for is that third copy of data offsite, you can actually integrate more into your conversations with your customers as well. And yes, before I forget, you do get insider protection, which you do not get otherwise without Cloud Connect. So what does this mean essentially is you as a partner will be able to have that extra safety net if the customer deletes a backup somehow, not made it immutable at all, and you get to keep the backup file for your defined period after the deletion as well. So you pretty much having that extra safety net when a customer makes the mistake as well. Again, Veeam Cloud service providers will actually get access to Veeam Service Provider Console, and this is probably one of the most powerful tools that you will have at your liberty to use, and this will give you centralized management of all your customer locations, all of their Veeam backup and replication servers, and it'll even allow you to do some troubleshooting steps. It'll even give you visibility. Not just that, your customers can log into this and take a look at what is happening with their sites, which you might not be able to get with object storage, right? And we can couple this with billing, reporting, and monitoring as well. Let's take a look at what V11 got specifically, the most recent update for Veeam from a security enhancement perspective. So if you did have, pre-V11, you might have seen that in the security settings, we had the self-signed certificates and all of that. But after V11, we brought in a feature for your federal and government customers, right? If you're looking at that FIPS kind of compliance modes, Veeam is now certified, and we're compliant by that, and it is available in the UI. So if you have some government customers who are very particular about those things, just keep in mind that as a tool you can leverage Veeam. This might mean that you might have to follow other rules as well. For example, your VDDK setup is probably 7.0 update 1, which means you'll have to upgrade your VMware environment, and again, this comes with other options as well. So essentially what's going to happen when you check this checkbox is Veeam will be getting everything, all the data mover services that's going to be deployed is all going to be FIPS compliant, right? Everything is always going to use the SSL library, and Veeam uses safe logic for this certification. We do have all of that information documented as well. If you do need more information, make sure you jump on to the Veeam website, and we've got that listed as well. All right, so I think I already spoke about it. That's fine. It's a single click and you can enable the FIPS mode for Veeam. Persistent guest handling. This is something that I actually really like with Veeam. From a security perspective, you're not going to get that objection every time that, hey, your services is actually trying to access the virtual machine a number of times because we're trying to get application consistent backup of your SQL server. So you don't need that anymore. Veeam can actually install a persistent guest agent and leave it there and use it when we actually want to do it, right? Where is this useful? Specific Oracle SQL servers, and just making sure that, every time we don't have to go through that extra login step as well. Again, pretty much the same thing. We moved into the Linux persistent data movers as well. I think we spoke about this when I was talking about the Linux immutability that we can actually attain, making sure you disable your SSH during normal operations, never enable that TCP/22 port. And again, just for that initial deployment and when you need to upgrade as well. So we'll always have that installed. Transport service, again, the Veeam transport service does not require root permissions. So that's another thing that you need to understand. You can create a service account with that one-time access and no root access, right? But just understand this, when you are deploying the Linux immutability, somebody gets root, you've bigger problems to worry about, right? So I think Dean very specifically mentioned that Veeam is probably the cure, right? You should still do the prevention side of things and take care of security. And from a service provider console perspective, you do get MFA. So what does this mean is this is not for you to log in as a service provider, which obviously you can use, but more for your customers to log in. So if you've implemented all of those security layers at different, storage layers, then you might also want to make sure that, your customers, when they log in, maybe if somebody got hold of their data, can just log into the console and actually take a look at what is happening with all of their backups, right? So even to get visibility into their environment, or even to take a look at what backups are located on which servers, you can always enable MFA. So service provider console allows you to enable MFA for a service provider login, a customer login, a tenant login, or even a reseller. So if somebody is reselling or white labeling, your services, then you can always enable MFA. So every time they log in, they probably get a prompt on their, Microsoft or a Google Authenticator that they've installed on their phone, and this need is set up on the first time, and then they'll be only able to log in to get visibility into alarms, reporting, backups. And if you've given them rights to actually manage the backups as well, they can do it from their service provider login, console login. So that's also a really good tool to have with multi-factor authentication enabled as well. So you're actually covering from point A to point Z in every possible situation. All right, and that entire product is actually RESTful API compliant. So as a service provider, if you've already got an existing portal, don't worry, all of that can actually point straight away to your existing portal, and you'll be able to leverage your RESTful API services to actually take a look and make those changes as well as and when you need. All right, let's take a look at key takeaways. As Dean was talking to that cybersecurity defense strategy, making sure you have one documented, designed with security in mind. When you are designing your data protection platform, make sure you're going through that segmentation, make you're going through the security domains, make sure you're setting up your separate backup account and backup network if that is feasible for you, and making sure you're actually implementing the scale-out backup repository and immutability in every step of the process, be it performance tier, capacity tier, or even archive tier. And where you see fit, make sure you leverage Veeam Cloud Connect, because that actually adds on additional conversations for you as a partner. All right, I know you probably had enough of all of that, and that was a lot of information to bring in. So once you do get the slide deck, you'll be able to go check for additional resources, take a look at those best practice websites, because that's really handy and that's always updated from Veeam as well. And you can take a look at the V11 scale out backup repository, backup lifecycle as well. Those are some resources that you will definitely keep in handy. Again, as a service provider, do not worry, you have exclusive support, a support team which is set up only for Veeam Cloud Service Provider, so you can always have them on a speed dial when you need to. And if it's a production outage, every 7 incident will be taken care of as well. And you always have your friendly Veeam rep. Please feel free to reach out. Again, I'd like to thank you from Dean and my end for having the patience and jumping on to the session today. Thank you so much. And I'll see if we can take some questions now that we have a few minutes left. Do we have any questions? Yeah, I do see. Will this recording be posted? Yes, the recording will be posted. And I think the rest of the questions were handled on the chat, so that's all right. Looks like somebody was answering those questions. Thank you so much. Thanks, guys. Have a good day ahead and take care.
Thank you.